Hey guys, I've got two really interesting chess games to share with you now. They're both 10-minute rapid games. I played them consecutively against different opponents. In both games I played white. In both games my opponent responded with the Sicilian, and I in turn went for the Grand Prix Attack. And in both games they absolutely went down to the wire with really exciting checkmates. So I thought I'd share these with you, and my intention is to inspire you maybe to start using the Grand Prix when you play as white, if you're an e4 player and if you face the Sicilian a lot and you don't really know how to respond to it. So let me take you through both games. We'll do it quite quickly, but lots and lots of fun. Okay, so e4, the Sicilian c5, and now we go closed Sicilian with knight to c3. Okay, they develop their knight to c6, and then the trademark move of the Grand Prix, f4. Okay, now I've done one video on the Grand Prix Attack about 3 or 4 weeks ago, but that was against a player rated below 1000. These players are both rated close to 1400. Okay, so we're playing against a higher standard here. Okay, so f4, and the idea is that we want to move the knight to f3 behind the pawns. d6 is played, there goes the knight, the other knight's developed, and then I push d3, so finishing my nice pawn structure on the light squares here. e6 is played, and then I move my light square bishop to e2. This is not a problem because after I castle, the idea is to move my queen to e1 and then over to here and do something deadly and ferocious on the king side. Black develops his bishop behind his pawn, so black's got quite a compact, tight structure right now. He's getting ready to castle kingside. I castle, he castles. I develop my dark square bishop now to a fairly useful central square. a6 and a3 are played, so that's just basically stopping these knights, any idea that these knights have got of coming in and causing trouble on the queen side. And now another very typical thematic move with the Grand Prix, queen to e1, getting ready to attack on the king side. Knight comes in, attacking my bishop. I retreat my bishop. White pushes his b pawn, and now I kick the knight away. The knight has really nowhere to go, can't go there, there, there or there without being captured, so the knight goes back to his natural square f6. And now I'm thinking that I want to bring my bishop into the action and also this knight. So one of the nice things about pushing h3 is it gives you an opportunity to reroute the knight round where it might get a more useful square. d5, and then I push e5, kicking the knight one more time. So you can see now that this knight's out of the way, and black has this pawn structure here, this bishop's completely hemmed in. The knights aren't in the game, and now it's time to focus my attention on a kingside attack. So the bishop comes into h5, pawn pushes. I'm not too concerned about that. In fact, I'm okay if he captures there and I recapture with the b pawn. So I just move my knight round. It might now join in the fun on the king side. Takes, takes. That's okay. This square's still covered, so I'm not too concerned about this knight anytime soon. Knight comes into d4 and we swap off. Now I push the c pawn to c3. Clearly the queen's looking at c2 right now, but I figure that if I go there and takes, and then I can take back the bishop, that's okay. The bishop and the queen are paired up quite nicely on that diagonal. Knight comes in, and now I lift my rook. Okay, another classic thing. I want to line up all my pieces against that black king and come in with something deadly. Meanwhile, black's activity is mainly on the queen side, and this is very common in the Grand Prix. My rook comes across to g3. Bishop comes in looking at this pawn. The pawn now has 2 attackers and only 1 defender, which is a rook. So I bring my bishop back down, jumps back out the way to defend the pawn. And now the exchange is not in black's favour anymore, because if either of these pieces takes, then bishop takes, he takes again, and I have the last capture, so I've only lost a pawn and a bishop. He'd have lost 2 pieces. And now it gets really exciting. There is a vicious pin on my rook, and it looks as though black has just swung a serious advantage here. But fortunately I spot a nice tactic, and the tactic is rook takes g7 check. There's no alternative really but for the king to capture the rook, and now I grab the bishop. Okay, so yes, I've gone down the exchange, but now black's king is exposed. And again, look where his pieces are. They're all on the wrong side of the board. They're all on the wrong side of this pawn chain. Okay, so now it's down to time. I need a blitzing attack. I want to checkmate that king before black can checkmate me via the queen side of the board. Okay, so now that the rook's out of the way, black can come in and grab the pawn, but I'm not worried about pawns. I've got, king blood on my mind. So I come in with a check. King only has 1 move. Go into the corner. Another check. The king comes out again, right? And now in comes the knight. And pretty much checkmate is now inevitable, okay? Because if the knight can get to h6, the king's in check and has no squares to go to. So black now thought for 25 seconds, came in with a check, but I can get my king to h2, and black has now run out of checks. He's now thought for another minute and a half, just grabbed a piece, but then knight to h6 is a lovely finish and a great checkmate. Black's actually down to 20 seconds on time right at this point. Okay, so heart in your mouth time with the Grand Prix Attack. Let's go for another one. Okay, same start. e4, c5 is played, the Sicilian. Knight to c3, closed Sicilian. Again, d6, again f4. Knight comes out, behind the pawn. And e6 is played. This time I bring my bishop out to pin the knight. I think previously I just moved my bishop to e2 only. And black breaks the pin by interposing his own light squared bishop, and I castle, kicks the bishop, and the bishop comes back down to e2. Pawn pushes, and I decide to ignore. I could have, I guess, pushed my f-pawn, but I figured that if black takes here, it allows me to develop my dark squared bishop for free, so that's alright. Knight comes out, and now I do actually push the f-pawn. So again, you see what we're doing is we're kind of blocking up the middle of the board to enable my pieces to focus on this king side should black castle. And clearly black isn't going to be looking at castling and putting his king there on c8 anytime soon. That just doesn't look right. Okay, queen comes along to e1. We saw that in the last game. Castles. Again, a3, just preventing that knight from coming in to b4. The knight comes into d4, which is quite a common move for black, and I swap off and then move my knight out of the way. You can see the same kinds of thematic ideas going on again. b5, queen now to g3, whereas previously in the last game I think the queen went straight to h4, and I had ideas about swinging my rook round. And this is, I think, a pretty good move by black here. Because obviously there's a threat. As soon as the queen goes here, the threat is, and it's a very, very common pattern, bishop to h6. The pawn can't capture the bishop because it's pinned, because the queen's there. And so the only way of preventing checkmate here would be if the bishop's there, he'd have to push the pawn, then bishop takes rook, and we've got ourselves some material. But the king moves out of the way, breaking the pin on the g7 pawn, and now I start to creep up with my pieces. While black's pushing pawns at the queen side, I'm not concerned about that. In comes the knight. We swap off knights. I decide to capture with the queen in this case. Pawn push again. I'm not worried about that side of the board, forget about that. But in this case I'll grab it anyway. Move my bishop out the way and we exchange rooks, okay? But the queen side is not my focus. Move my bishop up. Captures. And now black tries to kick my queen away with a pawn. Okay, and now we're getting ready for another exciting and nail-biting ending. All right, we have b3, takes, rook to a3, because the pawn's protected by the queen. The pawn is defending the rook, so the queen has to retreat. And now it's time to bring in a pawn. I want to bust open that king's side of the board. Black plays g6. I push another pawn up, he pushes another pawn up, I attack the queen again with my rook, and now bang. You see? With all these dark squares, my queen is now has a direct priority boarding pass straight into h6. King only has one option, and now again you can see an unstoppable checkmate is now in the pipeline. With pawn to f6, there is literally no way for the king to escape, because queen to g7 is coming with checkmate. So again, I mean, in this instance we're actually equal on material, but again it's just a very exciting, dramatic, dynamic way to attack your opponent when they play the Sicilian. I'm getting really into this. It excites me, it's good fun, and I do love endings like this. So if you've been looking for a way to respond to c5 in response to e4, which is one of the most common replies, and particularly at higher levels, the more advanced you get, the more Sicilians you will encounter. I do recommend the Grand Prix, but only if you like to live dangerously, because yeah, you need a fairly strong constitution to do this. So hope you've enjoyed it. Give it a whirl, and I will see you next time.